Talking. Yes, that's me.
Yeah, it's us.
We're recording in the morning, which is a thing that we used absolutely never to do at all. The earliest that the podcast ever happened was at about 2:00 in the afternoon, but...
Well, I don't like to get out of bed, but by default I'm getting out of bed fairly early these days.
We're going to pick up the story that we got halfway through with the early days of John Soane.
We're doing that. We're doing the episodes that like people generally watch or listen to, but which include ultimately the least interesting projects, which is the early career of all the architects.
Yeah. Oh well, here you go.
But I mean, that's not. They're often very informative.
Yeah.
But include rather a lot of the preamble rather than the juicy fat stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we have like some banger kind of student megalomaniac projects, but yeah, no buildings so far. We will encounter one or two buildings in this bit of the episode, though, as we get into the early days of the actual practice. Shall I kind of set the scene of where last we left our hero?
That sounds like a good idea. Not that I've forgotten at all.
Yeah, so the moment that we left, having achieved this very much desired and also rather unlikely achievement of becoming the Royal Academy travelling scholar and having this funded 3 years to explore the genius of antiquity out in Italy and thereabouts, he had met the Bishop of Derry, Frederick Hervey, while he was out there. The kind of winter of the second year of his scholarship, he received a letter in which the bishop must have said something which convinced him to give up the last part of his scholarship and return to London to attend on him. And we don't know exactly what it said because, unlike most of Soane's documents and correspondence and things, this was lost on the way back in an accident where a lot of things fell out of his trunk on a road between Switzerland and Germany. But yeah, no, the bishop must have said something to prevail on him to give up nearly a year of his scholarship, and he's said to have written various things in his little notebooks about, leaving Genoa, saying, "Oh, terribly sad to leave, and will I ever see you again?" And the
answer is no.
The answer is no.
He never went back to Italy.
That was once in a lifetime. As a client, the bishop must have seemed really ideal because he was someone who seemed to be interested in architecture. He'd produced this little architectural curiosity of the classical doghouse for him, which apparently had been delightful. And when he first met him, he'd started off as a bishop, and then quite soon after their initial acquaintance, he had become an earl bishop because of the death of his older brother. And so he seemed to be requesting from Soane not only a load of work to his existing seat at Downhill in Ireland, but also potentially the creation of an entirely new house in Suffolk at Ickworth, which was one of their big estates, and it must really have seemed like the perfect way to initiate a kind of career in one's own practice.
Soane has spent quite a bit of time with him, and he seems to have been extremely erratic. Even more erratic than the typical architectural clint.
He seems to have thought that he could manage him, and
as extremely erratic person.
As things turned out, that was not true. So there's basically, shall I just tell the story quickly about what happened? So we on screen we've got a page from Soane's notebook, which I think has some.
Yeah, we're doing the really brave opening here, aren't we?
Yeah.
that image is the...
I don't know what you necessarily make of this, but essentially they...
that looks like the sort of image that you produce early on in an architectural career.
He'd arrived back in Harwick in the middle of 1780, I think, and then he'd gone up to Suffolk to survey the proposed site of this new house, and then he'd gone to...
Is Harwick Harwich?
Harwich.
Harwich.
Yeah. I'm just saying it in the Viking way.
Cool. Just making sure we're talking about the same seaside town.
And then went over to attend on him at Downhill in his episcopal lodgings, residence, palace. So I think that the big new house obviously was for a bit further up, and then the amendments to the existing house would have been a bit of something right now.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what we're looking at. But yeah, the bishop seems to have been a real nightmare client of a rather familiar type. Extremely opinionated.
That sounds familiar.
Uninterested in being convinced of things which are contrary to his opinion, but also a great vacillator and someone who likes to change his mind all the time. So
familiar.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Like really strong opinions.
Yeah.
But
Doesn't
not
like to-
able to really express what they are ultimately in a way which actually you could ever draw.
Yeah.
Like contradictory things. Not wanting to make up their mind. Huge swings of opinion.
So I think initially there seems to have been a plan to build some new rooms, some new kind of grand rooms and a colonnade. To be honest, I just don't really know what we're looking at in this sketch. I think maybe that's the big room they were going to add. Also, there's at some point a plan to like reface the front of the house, which is a sort of classic thing, make it bigger and look a bit bigger and make it look grander. But things seem to keep changing. He keeps changing. First they want to enter on one side of the house, then they're going to enter on the other side. He spends 6 weeks with him, and at the end he is unable to bear it anymore, and he has to say, please, can I be released from this obligation and go back to London, which he does, having been paid much less than he had already spent in expenses, at least according to him. There's a moment in his notebook where his biographer records, the entry in Soane's notebook under Monday reads, "Everything entirely changed." And then after that, he seems to have given up. And there's a kind of there's sort of notes to self where he's sort of saying, yeah, he wants to add another gallery. The house is already all full of galleries. Don't add another gallery, but I guess we're going to have to do it anyway because that's what he wants. And then in his memoirs, he skirts around the whole thing and what they actually fell out about, but he just says,
well, to me, it's quite possible also that John Soane, who is tempestuous,
a man of sort of strong,
high passions.
They don't seem like a match made in heaven, these two. But I think subsequent architects were also to find this guy a very difficult client.
The two things are definitely, yeah. It doesn't really have much import on his architecture, although possibly some reflection on his character, which we will meet again and again, I think.
Yeah, and I think also it's sort of...
Do you want to describe what we're looking at, actually, as well?
So it's like a partial plan with a mix of what I think are existing and proposed elements. There is half of a room at the bottom with what looks like a kind of entrance portico, and then there's a sort of L-shaped extension going up the page with a kind of 3-bayed big grand room with a sort of niche, kind of apsidal sort of niche, semicircular niche at either end. All looks
very neoclassical.
Very neoclassical, rather Adamesque.
That's it.
Anyway, he must have felt a bit of a fool for not having made the most of his...
Yeah, having a year
of
Italy and going to see more things and having a great time and meeting more exciting people.
He seems to have rather brooded on it, which I think he was prone to doing anyway. But luckily he had lots of other rich friends he'd made on the Grand Tour, and he was able to pick up a bunch of other work.
Is that a sketchbook page?
That's a sketchbook page, yeah.
Yeah. There's a familiar thing in the architectural drawing I guess it's probably less true in older generations, where you're trying to fit a drawing early in your career on a piece of paper that is too small for it.
Yeah.
Because you don't have a big enough printer or whatever, and you've got to hold to a scale.
Yeah.
And he's gone right up to the edge, and the building is sort of poking out on all sides of the sketchbook.
Yeah. Oh, it's a nice little
Quite
drawing.
Sweet. He's very good at knocking the sketchbook things out, isn't he?
Yeah. And the thing is that actually he would be fine. In that year, he had a couple of other... Well, he had another sort of similar job to do some alterations to a big grand house, and the following year he would have about 8 commissions of a similar kind.
So we may have mentioned this before, but we can put pay to something, which is that nowadays we think of him as an architect who doesn't do very much. But in the back of this book, there's a list of his works.
He was very prolific. He had lots and lots of jobs.
And just the chronological list goes on for 5 pages.
Yeah. At least 2 of those are the short period at the beginning that we're covering now. So it's,
Yeah, I mean,
he has loads and loads of these jobs of different sizes for rich people in their houses, and we're not really going to talk about most of them. So that's a sketch for his other job in the same year. He did a kind of proposal for a house in Berwickshire in Scotland,
which is large, English Palladian, I would say, sort of, but with big pitched roofs.
Anyway, there's not very much to say about any of those, but there is a the record of all of these kind of initial projects is there in his sketchbooks and other papers in the museum. Oh God, I should have reviewed what we actually put in here.
What a lot! There's another one. This is another Palladian winged country house at sort of Palladio scale, and it's got his typical round arch brickwork, but with rectangular windows. These country house designs feel very Palladian.
Yeah, I guess the thing which is novel is the little, or not novel, but like that you don't have in Palladio is the like little recessed arch with a sort of punched window in the middle there. That's kind of, it's in like a Palladian mood, but it feels like he's doing it in a slightly different way.
We're not going to go through them.
Yeah.
So if we think of these, the early year or mid years of the 1780s.
Yeah.
There's so in 1783 he's doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 country house projects. The next year similar.
Yeah. I've picked out one or two for us to look at, but
some of them are for quite significant places. They're like this building, some work at Kingston Lacey. Lots of these, nothing happened to them.
Yeah.
As in they're not nothing came of it.
Yeah.
Executed and burnt down. Oh well.
Not straight away. So in that first year, he did also do this competition for this mega prison in Battersea, shown in a later illustration where again it's embedded in this sort of classical Arcadian landscape. I mean, even more incongruously than...
This seems like a very funny thing. The Soane Super Prison.
Yeah, so I think this was in 1780. There'd been a report. Essentially, there was a crisis in British prisons arising out of the loss of the American territory, which had been a place to ship convicts to, and suddenly they didn't have anywhere to send them away to, and there was a kind of there was a crisis of prison capacity.
What if we made a new sort of America inside a wall?
They had discovered Australia, but not yet concretely identified its potential as a
they would try. They would try prisons for about 15 years, and then they would go back to shipping people off.
Yeah,
much easier.
There are two designs. This is the men's prison. It's like a sort of triangular arrangement of these sort of kind of mega castle forms, which are like a double cross. Each one is a sort of double cross with 4 cylindrical towers at the intersections.
And then big wings of, arched. It's funny, this is for 600 prisoners. It looks like a building for way more.
Yeah, it does look absolutely massive. I mean, I think that there was also a kind of idea of making prisons like a little bit less inhumane in this competition as well. So
yeah, in Newgate. I mean, is this the one that produces, what's the Bentham prison in Battersea called? But it was all solitary confinement.
Yeah, the kind of panopticon style.
Yeah, and this more humane way to treat people. It's going towards the kind of... We've been banging on this ever since. The humane way of doing it is kind of like the environment's got to be completely unstimulating, sterile, and everyone's got to be separated from all human contact.
Yeah.
So they go insane.
Yeah.
The idea happened straight away. As soon as people were sort of doing prisons as a punishment, we're going to do this. And we've been trying it ever since.
It's quite a crazy plan.
Yes. I mean, you can't help thinking that this is a kind of very functional type of building, a sort of process building, very popular with students.
Sort of corridor plan with lots of circulation.
But Soane hasn't been able to help himself doing a kind of slightly Campus Martius, Piranesian plan of exotic shapes.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know what you call that shape. You know the fat paper aeroplane?
Yes.
The one where you fold in the corners
of
a square. It's a bit like that.
Yeah.
But then within it, there's a series of, there's 3 big circles, some smaller circles. Inside the circles are double crosses.
Yeah.
There's a strange central triangular planned building, which seems to be very curious. There's various like pie slices and cruciforms going off at different angles. This cannot possibly be like the most efficient way of planning this thing.
No. The actual storage of prisoners must be about 5% of the
I think
plan area of the prison?
That's generous.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if that was around 2%, actually, from 3.
But it is. I mean, prisons. He designs a few prisons over the none of which are built, but they are an exercise in which you can really explore like strong architectural character.
Absolutely,
these,
yeah.
These ones are a bit reminiscent of the big ducal palace in the middle of Milan, aren't they? Like these kind of like big round, sort of bricky forms. These big sort of quite kind of hollow.
Sforza Palace with the big tower.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Or I mean, also maybe the palace of the Pope that was formerly the mausoleum of Augustus.
Yeah. So we're talking about the big round sort of.
Yeah, the big roundy ones. I mean, you've got the two elements. You've got the big roundy towers, and then you've got the wings where they're kind of arched windows, but which are articulated almost like they don't look like they have glass in. They look sort of like the side of an aqueduct or something. You'd have lots of light. It'd be rather cold.
And it's in a castle
Yeah.
wall. The painting of it, My Early Follies or whatever, really does it as a castle.
Yeah.
And these castle towers protruding. From the outside, it would have been like Pentonville, I think, where you just see the wall.
Yeah.
Obviously, and you kind of need this. There's a kind of, you've got to have a kind of double wall, right, to stop stuff getting chucked in and people getting out.
Yeah, no, it has a kind of free fire zone glacis around the edge.
If you see it, you can immediately see it's a prison.
That's the women's one, which is smaller and less developed.
Which is
again
a kind of perfect. Is this a like ideal city?
It's a kind of, again, this one's sort of triangle within a circle, and then there are three of this arrangement which are a little bit like an almshouse plan, like three sides of
very much
three sides of something.
Prison's got a lot of provision in terms of space, although the place seems truly, both of them seem really horrific. They've really got this like totalitarian prison control. I guess it's the complete opposite of Newgate, right? Which had been this where people have been trying to tidy up, which essentially something which is not far off the kind of dungeon.
Yeah, it's a kind of black hole dungeon, Newgate, whereas this is all lots of light and space.
Rational, enlightenment, industrial, logical.
This is not a kind of pure enlightenment machine like Bentham's Panopticon. It's something which is full of all of these very strong architectural flavours and kind of evocations of
it's between Panopticon and Boulez or something like that. It's like he's given himself over too much to architecture.
Yeah, well, he can't help himself, can he?
Because he's just okay, total control, right? My total control, I understand.
Yeah,
these are the first projects he's going to go on and build and do proposals, at least, for basically all of the new types of state buildings.
Yeah.
And the period in which he's alive is a period, it already begun, I guess it's been going on slowly for a while, in which the state goes from being, 100 years before he was born, it was a bit more than the household of the monarch, with kind of functionaries. But by the time he dies, there are thousands of civil servants, and does various things. It does an awful lot more. I mean, it does mainly war, but in order to do war, it has to do
finance.
Yeah. And then that sort of generates administration of finance. It has to do justice.
Yeah.
Which means prisons and things. And it's starting to get a lot more involved in semi-public-private infrastructural activities, which generates tons of activity, and empire administration.
Yeah. I mean, he'll be involved in all sorts of new buildings for new institutions, whether those are courts for debtors, whether those are things to do with the financing of the state, where at one point he'll build what essentially is the forerunner to the National Archives. All these types of things are being initiated and invented, and the modern state is kind of taking shape in part.
And these are the first sort of stabs at those new institutional state buildings.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable how the prison buildings are recognisably the same thing that's been built ever since.
Yeah.
These are sort of too architecturally expressive. And the men's prison's more realistic than the women's prison. The women's prison seems to be like, it's got a garden, and it's like an almshouse.
Yeah.
With a wall around it.
Yeah,
like
it's very, very faint, but I think actually all these spaces are closed with sort of buildings around the edge, but which you almost don't kind of read in the plan. And it does actually have the kind of
double wall
glacis around the wall for picking people off as they attempt to fly.
Yeah, not only. I think it's kind of standard practice now. We don't generally. It's just a way of stopping people getting out and stopping things getting in.
Yeah.
The triangular thing in the middle in both cases the sort of admin center.
Yeah, it looks to me like in each case that's the kind of administrative heart. Fascinating. They are very strange plans, and I'm rather into them. This is his first constructed building.
Cool.
A little shop.
A little shop. I mean, not that little.
Someone called Francis Adams, which I think is in Borough. It's in London.
Yeah.
It's a nice little shop front, rather elegant little facade with these.
Above knee height is a totally glazed facade.
Yeah.
Which is something in commercial architecture that you would only do at this point, as we are in the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
In a time which is not easy to connect ourselves to, because it's we're a long way away from trains and steam engines.
Yeah.
But we do suddenly have ground glass. I mean, this would all be blown and spun.
Yeah.
Which is still pretty expensive, but enabled by coke.
Yeah.
Brought in by canals.
Yeah, you can do enough glass now that you can have these kinds of things, and you can have a sort of cast iron structure in there.
Frames, which again is coal, coke.
Yeah.
Boats, ships, brought down by canals. I mean, there's been coal in London for a couple of 100 years by this point. And in fact, all the Wren churches are paid for by coal tax. But there's been a slow and incremental improvement in kind of materials industry.
Yes.
And big improvements in communications. We're well into canals by this point. Before canals, you can't move heavy things over land.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible.
You can only do it for purposes of war, really.
And even then, it is, the cost of moving your army over land is the cost of a large chunk of them dying.
Yeah.
It's just so hard, especially in non-perfect conditions, which is what there generally is. Anyway, that's rather a long way away from this rather lovely sort of shop front. The building, while Luke is looking it up, is 3 bays, 3 stories. It has a pitched roof with a round window in it. The second story has rectangular windows. The piano nobile level has round arches with lintels and then rectangular windows in them, like we saw in the country house design, which either have roundels on the top or little windows above them, which feels to be quite Palladian. And then below is an opening with columns on either side, and then 2 bay windows with windows on either side of them, with that grid of panes of glass that you would think of in a sort of Georgian facade. But it's a shop front, recognisably so, where you could display a lot of merchandise, I presume, and would also let a lot of light in. And something clearly where they're putting a lot of money into lighting and showing the retail space. I don't know when this sort of shop front develops, but it's not around a huge amount earlier. And there also aren't very many shops in the modern sense much before this. It's the era when we're beginning to get street lighting, shops, this kind of new world of the types of buildings and cities that we're familiar with, associated at this point with luxury consumption.
But it's sweet, isn't it?
It's sweet, and now it doesn't look like anything. And it's very hard to work out what he is doing. I suspect his touches are things like the first floor arched windows, which feel very Sonian. And then it's proportional.
Yeah. It's very proportional, but he's also managed to create, with very, very sort of minimal means, the sort of sense of an architrave above the kind of upper the ground floor with this sort of little string, and then also like a sense of greater weight for the first floor windows, even though they're almost the same size as the second floor windows. This kind of little low relief sort of arch thing that they're placed within.
It's hard to work out what the materials of the facade. I mean, I presume this is stock brick, the top. but it looks rendered.
Yeah, it looks rendered. I wonder.
Um,
Okay, what else have we got to look at?
This feels like a French neoclassical project.
Yeah, so I think it's in the first couple of years that one of the big jobs, and one that produces this very little memorable, funny little building, is some work at a place called Hamels, where he designs this dairy. But
this is a dairy on the model of the little village in the Palace of Versailles. Where, it's not a real one. It's a back to nature for aristocrats one.
Yes, it's a sort of landscape feature, but it's an opportunity to do a form of extremely rustic classicism. It has these columns which are actually like sort of rough timber. I think I got another picture of it. Yeah,
they're trees with the bark, tree trunks with the bark still on.
Yeah. Here we get to experience for ourselves the special story about how the classical order originates in timber and then is solidified into stone with these little, well, they're not triglyphs, but they're where the triglyphs,
sort of dentation.
Yeah, where they would be. And it's thatched. And it's pink.
I mean, this is the kind of pink lime Adam era of like really loose colours. You want your living room in orange and lime?
Yeah.
Fine.
Why
Fantastic.
Not? Why not? Yes. Like
Which
the Etruscans.
Yes. Subsequently produces a certain amount of emotional difficulty amongst restorers to put the colours back.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Really? Are you sure? Yeah.
Gosh, it's so horrible.
Yeah.
This one's not horrible. I think
it's very adorable.
Pastel pink is quite perfect.
There's something rather extraordinary about this
coffered barrel vaulted ceiling.
Yeah, here you go. Here's the Basilica of Maxentius and Constantine on the scale of a like one story.
Yeah, how is this meant to work apropos cows?
I don't know. What's the cow circulation? I think the cows go in this bit, don't they?
I don't know.
I think this bit in the back with the barrel vaulted ceiling must be cow central because it's got these sort of niches in the wall, and then I think these two bits on the side are for
dairying in some way.
I feel like cows need kind of clear axial circulation. I don't think you can propose to get them back in and out the same door like this.
If I was designing a milking parlour, it doesn't meet all the spec. It doesn't meet all the spec for a milking parlour.
Yeah.
I have no idea how they did it back then, but
at least they know this is their house. Got
a
picture of a cow.
How are you going to do the muck out? Where are the channels?
I don't know. I don't think these are a higher class of cow. I don't think they do that kind
of
thing.
They don't do that sort of thing.
I don't think they do that. Yeah.
Where'd you put the scraper? Yeah. It's a little folly with a big cow on it.
Yeah, it's a little folly.
It was built.
Yeah.
And existed for quite a long time and then burnt down, didn't it? Or something like that.
Oh dear.
Or was demolished.
Sohn was quite a prolific documenter and publisher of his own work, and he published 2 books of his own designs in the first decade of his career, and I think 6 books overall over the course of his career. And this is from the second one, which is a book of designs for houses, essentially. I should say actually that we're going to talk in greater depth about the books on the bonuses. Will be one of the things that we do. So that will be something.
And probably the lectures.
Yeah, also So I think that the kind of Sohn media will be something we get into in greater depth in the bonus episodes, which are available to subscribers on Patreon. I think there are lots of things like this in the kind of early part of the career, building a nice little gatehouse for the entrance to the estate.
Yeah, I mean, the things that I think about them are, firstly, they're recognisably what they are of their time.
Yeah.
Georgian pieces. Secondly, they all seem more even than usually inspired by Palladio.
Yeah.
And thirdly, you can recognise things that are distinctly Sohnian already. The first message you get from them isn't that this is John Sohn.
No.
But they have the Sohnian arches.
Yeah.
And something of this slightly stark, and I guess that's part of what makes it feel like Palladio as well, this slightly stark fenestration.
Yeah. I think the starkness is partly, with a lot of these, they would have been less stark in real life because they would have been brick rather than stucco. So it does soften them a little bit, and it kind of breaks down the abstraction of the composition.
And some might have been stone. You don't use stucco very much in this climate.
Goes green.
None of these are the houses that he would be... I mean, even in terms of the house projects, I would say the more famous ones are probably the later ones after he got onto the bank, you know.
These are all... We've got a series of these as he illustrates them in the book of house designs that he published in 1788. This one, I think, is Schottschum, which I think was executed, although maybe not totally like this. But it's interesting. I thought this was interesting because it's a bit like a kind of Sonian take on the Palladian box, on a kind of Palladian box like Claremont, like the Henry Holland one that we saw, that he'd kind of worked on when he was learning his trade. The difference, obviously, is that it has a kind of attached portico rather than a kind of...
Yeah, that front facade feels quite Adam to me.
Yeah.
The arches are maybe not semicircular, but kind of ellipses. Yeah, an attached portico. It's got some things that feel quite like modifications of Palladian.
Yeah.
This like hinted at sort of sub-layer basement.
Yeah.
It's one of the ones where the main floor is the slightly elevated ground floor.
Yeah.
The circulation's very Palladio, although he doesn't have this sort of strictness with, or I think as exciting sort of organisation of the plan. I don't feel that it's got... Sure, there's a place where you can look right through both ways, but I'm not sure the circulation around the core is that interesting. It's basically a corridor going one way.
Yeah, it's more interesting in some of the other ones. Yeah, it's if this was a Palladio house, all the doors would be in the middle. Bob, 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 bob.
Yeah, and there were and the kind of tartan grid would have some interest in it.
There are some later ones that are a bit more kind of interesting. So this is one called well, no, actually, I'm not sure this is later, but anyway. So this is a smaller one. He's generally better when he's smaller, I think, or the less he has to work with, the better the design is.
Yes.
His kind of ideal is obviously something quite conservative, and really a kind of ideal inherited from that, very much like the sort of middle of the 18th century, or when he...
I know you're a big apologist for his like greenfield mega proposals. They're interesting because they're so transgressive, but they are also at some level bad.
But also
maybe
at some
bad
level,
good.
several good, yeah.
Bad good. But when he's really boxed into a weird triangular corner and he can't do any of his classicism and he's just actually thinking about, how do I make this good?
Yeah.
He can come up with inventive, novel, delightful solutions, and I don't think he ever gets over that dynamic.
Yeah, so in the book he does 2 or 3 designs for each house. He kind of gives you the one as built sometimes they haven't been built at all, and he will give you at least 2 designs and normally 3 designs. When you look up projects on the Sohn collection website, there's nearly always like 7 versions or 9 versions, which often will all be drawn up in exactly the same way. And we'll see this with some of the more kind of urban projects. There'll be like an illustration. There'll be 7 identically formatted watercolour illustrations of the same project, exploring
which are
all
often
of the
different treatment. Like they're often like lots of different facade treatments.
Yeah.
Of the same sort of plan.
Yeah.
Not always, but often.
Yeah, no, they're not radically different. It's I wonder how much of that is driven by clients and how much of that... I think that must be at least partly driven by his desire to explore the kind of possibilities.
Yeah, there's two things. One is he's got some of the habits of highly effective architects, which is like production mania, just like always forward.
Yeah.
And sometimes I wonder if it's a bit like toddler management. Okay, so we want to distract you from this decision by offering you 2 choices around the thing that you're going to have to do. Do you want to change anything substantive about the way the building works? It's, here, look, there's 2 pretty pictures. Do you think this pretty picture or this pretty picture is nicer?
Yeah. I thought the plan... So this one is a smaller house. The plan for this one I thought was quite Adam-esque. Like it does that thing that you get in Adam plans where you always enter and exit the room in a different way. So it's like enter in the corner, exit in the middle, exit in the other corner, and then there's another one. It's sort of... There's this kind of meander. You have the sort of proportions of the rooms is sort of Palladian, but the circulation is almost like a little bit picturesque. It's kind of leading you in a sort of enjoyably winding path.
He always puts the 2 stairs. There's the service stair and the sort of grand stair next to each other in general, which is interesting.
This is the other option for the same house, which I think is a more enjoyable elevation, but a less good plan.
Yeah.
Or slightly mad plan, really. I don't like...
The front of the house is bats.
Yeah, I think maybe that's an upstairs plan, so that's why it looks a bit strange. But it's I don't even know, how would you characterise that tower? It's a sort of big half-cylinder tower on the front, which terminates in half-round dome with swags on it. Very confectionery.
That looks much more so than that facade as well. It's got the round-topped tall windows.
Yeah,
this strange. It looks a bit like a round-nosed bullet.
Yeah. Yeah,
but made of icing sugar, which comes down to a little sort of temple-y thing, but with lots of these tall, thin, round-topped windows. That one looks more Sonian and a bit silly.
Yeah, it doesn't look
resolved.
The inside, there's some very weird circulation. It almost looks as if it's been divided into flats or something. Anyway, it's but yeah, good banger facade. And those are the other plans. And then this is a section of a different house called...
I mean, you can see something Sonian here, which is that like almost every room has got a domed ceiling.
Yeah.
Or a vaulted one anyway, on the ground floor.
Yeah, this is tendring.
Although not in the section.
Yeah. But it's got, you see there's a kind of big hall with light well in the middle of the plan.
Is it a light well with a glass dome?
Yeah.
And the glass dome is in itself a sort of light well of the kind of attic story.
Yeah. So there's kind of, the attic is lit from above the glazing of the light well there.
Which presumably would mean you're getting only indirect light, or accepting in some very, very sunny days, only indirect light into the core, which is probably something he's thinking about.
I guess it must be, yeah. It doesn't have a north point on here, and I haven't checked what the actual orientation of the house is.
But I feel that is boxed in on 4 sides.
Yeah.
A little bit. So it's the light well is sunk into the plan. The kind of glazing dome is sunk into the plan, so that most of the direct light wouldn't hit the dome of glass. So you'd have this relatively neutral lighting in the core.
Yeah, no, that seems likely to me. I think that must be the intention, is to kind of have this very controlled, kind of diffuse light, which is in the center,
working towards something that sort of becomes his like genius invention, which is you bring indirect light down the sides of the big room.
Yeah, a lot of what people take out of Sohn later is this kind of proto-abstraction, or his willingness to make things which seem extremely stripped back, which seem like kind of brick boxes, or seem like they are gesturing towards a kind of architecture of sort of abstraction and of kind of truth to materials. But
I would say there's sort of 2 input things that you could kind of say if you were wanting to make a literary point about this or whatever.
Yeah.
From Palladio, he's got, you can strip the classical back to like pure light. You can go minimalist.
Yeah.
And if you want to include decoration, it can be kind of linear. I mean, these ones really aren't decorated in the way that his later ones will reintroduce it, but it will be reintroduced from the most simple forms in general. And the other one is, he has a lot of copies of Lurgier in his library. I think someone said more than 10. Primitivism in the early ones, there's that stable block with flint, which is quite an attractive built project. I don't know if that's included in here. And obviously the milking parlour is really a kind of clunking demonstration. Okay, we're actually going to have trees as columns.
Yeah.
Kind of get possibly a bit away from all the Adam frills, but still in that world. And also the insincerity of the Baroque and the Rococo, or the kind of late Rococo, to something lively and strong and primal, like the ruins of Rome or Etrusca or Greek temples, something butch.
It's interesting because like he's definitely someone, when he lectures and when we talk about the lectures, like propriety and doing things like properly according to the rules is something that he stresses a lot. And I think that one of the kind of tensions or dilemmas running through his career is that he's in a city full of kind of developer builders who are throwing up things which he thinks are appalling, but he is also very interested in the kind of possibilities of new forms of construction, or he's someone who sort of understands the possibility of like exploring the range of building characters and the whole sort of range between things which are very basic and very sort of stripped back all the way up to things which are kind of fully decorated and Corinthianized. He never sort of makes the case for that particularly.
Yes. Like in many ways I think about him at this stage as being very like Los.
Yeah.
A lot later, except that Los is able to be a radical. And for John Soane, I think fitting in socially and sort of attempts at social climbing is so important.
Yeah.
And this new club he's joined,
the Architects Club.
Yeah, well, I just meant in general, like the kind of notion of like he's moving up rapidly in the social world, and he's literally joining clubs. He's literally becoming a member of the Royal Academy.
Yeah.
He's in the Architects Club. He's tried to be very clubbable. General culture at the time was very formal.
Yeah.
Very hidebound. The academy was very academic.
Yeah.
So I can see how that works. But at the same time, he's obviously really transgressing rules all the time. I mean, what I'm trying to see in these, going back a bit, another one. We've got the two little sculptures on the top. I mean, that's beginning to get some bits that feel quite Soanian.
Yeah.
He's like almost the only person who does the Palladio figures on top of all the columns and roofs and things. I mean, he doesn't put them on the roofs very often, but you're starting to get a lot. He uses full-length figural sculptures as architectural infill a lot.
These kind of like incised, very, very slightly kind of pushed back arched opening things are
extremely
Soanian feature. Yeah.
He loves to set a circular arch in another circular arch, or sets things in a circular arch, or play with an elliptical with a lower arch as well, meeting things that will kind of go towards his signature pendentive dome, which we will get onto.
Yeah.
I'm desperately like trying to find in these elements of stylistic development. In terms of the plans, they are fine, but they're not like really...
They're not setting the world on fire.
They're not very different.
No. Yeah, I mean, the last one, I wasn't going to say anything about this. This is one called Chillington, which the only significance of which is didn't get built, but it's one of the drawings he had in the Royal Academy. He always had at least one thing in the Royal Academy show every year, and all the way through. And this is the one that he had in 1778.
And that seems like it could be by Soane. I would not be able to tell you that was by Soane.
Yeah, it's not.
Like, not on any amount of examination.
Not super.
There's nothing interesting about it. It's big. It's big. It's got a portico. It's wide. It's a country house. But it could also be a city building.
Yeah.
I guess it's what people wanted, but perhaps he hadn't also found himself yet.
Yeah,
I mean, look, like you see that sort of photograph there. That's from the inside of something. That photograph feels Soanian.
Yeah, that's Letton. That's the one that we looked at.
Okay, yeah. So the inside of it, the inside of this hall has got something which is very Soanian, which is in plan. The top of the staircase is semicircular.
Yeah,
and then it has semicircular cutouts going into it, but they're going into the curve.
Yeah.
So you have two curve forms meeting each other, which allows for a bit more sort of exciting geometric play. Yeah. And then in some of the other houses, you'll get this same set of geometry being played in stark, and then more elaborated and more... So the kind of starkest is just white plaster.
Yeah.
The two forms meeting each other, like they're made of computer stuff.
Yeah.
And then, nicer materials and more kind of ornamentation and things. I mean, is the stables
also
block...
Got the barn a la Paestum, I've left
Yeah, the barn a la Paestum. And
you can stick that out. Let's stick that in. You've got to be very good at plan and section.
Yeah.
And putting them together. There's a sort of intricacy which
but
comes
also
out of...
he does just apply the geometry and doesn't worry about the consequences Yeah, like that sort of primitivism, where it's really rough and rugged, the stable block. And Paestum...
So what's the flint one?
It's the stables at Bletchworth Castle.
Oh.
There's different elements of things, right? There's always learning, but there's also in the background the fact that he's a bricklayer. And he's a bricklayer from the countryside. It's a mixture of vernacular and kind of academicism, I think, giving this really rough facade.
Yeah.
He's got a way of doing relatively cheaply kind of rustication by using rough, like flint and rag.
It's almost a kind of arts and crafts kind of facade, that one, isn't it? With the sort of the expression of the red brick string courses and then the flint in between.
But he's using this banding, brick banding with thick walls, and then there's buttresses coming out. But the buttresses aren't kind of coined as you would expect them to be, as in they don't have the tidy brick like making the shapes. He's just using this roughness to do whatever he wants. He's got he can kind of organise the bricklaying how he likes it to create this. I wish I would have had better pictures of it, but to create this facade that's got the beginning of the very, very plain, kind of very fine. Is it a buttress or is it a pilaster with no
expression?
No expression.
Yeah.
Which is a way of getting light onto the facade and producing sort of toughness and decoration at the most. It's almost the most austere thing you can do. And the other very austere thing you can do is have like slightly sunken in arches and then have things playing within the arch. Barn à la Paestum is a joke.
Yeah.
Which is a barn with unfluted Doric columns and no bases, all in rubbed brick.
It's kind of funny because the columns are so bricky and the bricks are they're rubbed and they're like quite highly finished. So it looks very crisp. Although they're like rustic columns, but they're finished in this sort of rather crisp, almost rather pretty sort of material.
Yes, lovely red brick. Again, probably shipped in from the Midlands or whatever with their nice red clay buff.
Yeah, it's very precise.
It makes me think also that maybe if you went to a Palladio building and it hadn't been very well maintained, it would look just like that.
Maybe that's what they were meant to look like in the first place. Yeah,
it would look just like that. Except obviously this is kind of Doric, but he continues to use flint as a kind of rough rural material.
Yeah,
that's the stables. A Palladian shape again. You've got a central thing with a pitched roof and wings, and then on either side you've got pavilions.
Yeah.
There are blind arches, and then the facade is decorated, which the facade is made of mostly flint with 2 bands of buff brick.
Yeah.
And then there are just sort of buttresses or pilasters coming out, but it's just a slight extrusion of a pilaster in this, and the whole thing feels very rough. It's something we don't often see with him, but it's a kind of melding together of the Palladian and this definite primitivist tendency.
Yeah, the return to essentials.
And the countryside.
Yeah.
There's a slight problem, I think, that this kind of does get a bit towards the out of town Asda sort of aesthetic.
Yeah, it's been successsucly adapted for the needs of the contemporary.
It's much better than that, but that like very low brick arches with a tiny bit of
where it sort of pops up a little bit above the entrance. Yeah, or the corner where you park the trolleys. So,
But it's got, and I guess it's also got a tiny bits of like Tuscan order as well, because we're in the countryside.
We're in the countryside and we're living the dream of rustic virtue.
And these drawings are still by Sohn
at this point. Yeah, I can't remember.
He does have assistants, I think.
I think he started taking assistants in the mid 1780s, maybe. I can't remember. I think around then. But it kind of gets going then.
We don't have to include this, but I thought we'd at no point said in this episode what he was actually doing. He's come back from the Grand Tour. He's being a jobbing architect.
Yeah.
He's working on his own. And what doing 11 different country house projects means in a year.
Yeah.
It means when you're preparing all the drawings yourself and then you have one assistant, it means you're going out in a carriage, going to a place, schmoozing an aristocrat.
Yeah.
then staying there for a little bit, drawing up, sending them drawings while presumably working on lots of other ones at the same time. And it's a life where he is sort of peripatetically going from country house to country house, schmoozing aristocrats.
Yeah.
Preparing and measuring the drawings himself. And
I mean, some of them quite distant, like London to Berwickshire. Probably takes
I have no idea how long that takes, but it would have been a generation before you couldn't travel in the winter because the roads were so bad. And in the course of his life, the roads were improving enormously, and you could travel in the winter. How fast would you be going? 4 miles an hour? How many miles is it? Several hundred.
Yeah.
Which would have taken a prodigious amount of time.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you've got a lot of other irons in the fire. So the reason he's producing these sets of drawings is because he really needs to get the work.
Yeah.
And fairly soon after he gets a better job, he stops doing country houses. And he stops doing country houses, I'm pretty sure, because the commitment they required to the travelling would have just been immense. And it would have been almost impossible to keep up commitments in London.
Yeah.
And travel.
Yeah.
In the pre-industrial era. And he's still quite young. He's still in his 20s.
Yeah.
And then early 30s, right? Must have just been at it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, meanwhile, he's also getting married and starting a family life in London. I'm sure we'll go over more details of the biography in the next episode, but I think we should make sure to remember to do that.
Interesting family life, yes.
Because his mixture of a mixture of elements of his personality, which are kind of manic energy, warmth, inventiveness, fun, short temper, thin skin.
Yeah. Grudges.
Grudges.
Yeah.
Not only, I think, obviously inform what architectural work he's able to do, but also, I think, there is something in the spirit of what he does with this boundless energy.
I thought we would cut it off here because it's in 1788 that, a series of things happen. I think, first of all, he attempts the job to build a new HQ for the East India Company comes up. Oh, no, it's not that. It's the job to be surveyor at Greenwich comes up. And he goes in for it, but is unsuccessful. The job is taken by a guy called Robert Taylor, who's also surveyor at the Bank of England. And then very fortuitously, he dies. So then, having been unsuccessful at the Greenwich job, he decides to go in for the job at the bank, which occupied this sort of big site at Threadneedle Street.
Although a tiny fraction of the site, as we know it now.
Yeah. Yeah, Soane would occupy this position over... between now and almost the end of his life, I think.
I think he did it till 33 and he died in 37.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Over which period he would completely transform the entire kind of building and site and create this really amazing sort of unique institution for the Bank of England, which we're going to examine in the next episode because it kind of merits a deep dive and exploration.
Yeah, it's a challenging thing to put together. It's a challenging thing also because it's a mythic building, and I hope that one of the questions, the framing questions, I think, is how good is this building actually?
It's a great lost building. It was demolished in almost. I mean, the external wall was kept, but most of it was, like 90% of it was knocked down in the 1920s.
It has a fascinating plan, and it has some really interesting, enigmatic internal spaces that are kind of known from sort of empty photographs. It's, after his museum, the most famous and influential work of his, and it is the work, along with the museum house, which typifies the thing that I think is most interesting to the first sort of modern interpretation, which is someone who's making plans that very much transgress simple order and the classicism. A lot of the buildings we've been looking at here are, particularly in the way that he is expressing them and publishing them in the drawings that we've seen there, I think possibly more in the drawings and the publication than in real life, they conform.
Yeah.
They conform to what at the time was possibly an attractive and fashionable norm.
Yeah.
And now is a norm which in itself is sort of stuck and boring. And then the great arc, if you go to an Adam internal thing, you can think this is fantastic. Or you go to Somerset House, it's got these amazing spaces and sort of moments where the strangeness or the kind of Piranesian prisons kind of image comes out. But when it's just cold and flat, it's rather boring.
Yeah.
And then again, in some of the photographs that we've seen, he's able also to bring out that quality where the kind of mathematical geometrical, instead of being just square, becomes strange. The mathematical consequence of intersecting, these two curved forms, is you get a more complex geometry, and these things together start to get your mind going.
Yeah.
But the Bank of England is much more transgressive. The plan of it is got a number of axes because it's built up accretively. Even before it was demolished, it would have been extremely enigmatic because it was essentially a blank facade in thick, robust fashion, inside of which there was a city of money.
Yeah.
Which composed of a number of different sort of organs of institution. There are a series of rooms for different activities which were quite ceremonial, kind of processing of money in various ways, dividends, coupons, consols. And it's a lot about processing and kind of different circulation routes.
Yeah.
In what ways was it also not only enigmatic and interesting, but also good? We can think about. Sorry, that was very rambling, but
fine.
I wanted to get some of what we're actually learning from what we've discussed.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. Sure. No, I think it's important. Well, I hope all of that made sense. We'll be back with you with the Bank of England. Bit of a shorter one today. Thanks very much for listening. We'll be putting up lots of sort of supporting visual material on our Instagram and Twitter channels, which are at @about_buildings. That will all be done by Matthew Lloyd Roberts, who is also editing the show. If you want to support the show and get access to bonus episodes, which I mentioned previously, you can do that on our Patreon page. All links for everything are on our website, which is aboutbuildingsandcities.org. Yeah, thanks again for listening, and until next time.
Yeah, good night.